Even the entrepreneur, after a while, recognizes, and by the way, a lot of medical professions begin to realize that once they've ventured into business, they've gone into sales, whether they appreciate that or not. That's the fact of the matter is. It's about marketing, it's about representing yourself, it's about initiating contact with people, letting the world know what you're up to and what services you can provide. My day today started in 1955. I was in the Navy at the time, and I was transferred from Trinidad, British West Indies over to San Diego, California. And in transit, they lost my pay records. And now supposedly I had them with me, and I turned in my packet like I was supposed to, but the records weren't in there. And so in transition, somehow they got misplaced, and I was told in no uncertain terms, if you don't have a pay record, guess what? You don't get paid. No money forthcoming. And they said it might be, a week, a month, maybe several weeks, several months before they could find the records or reconstruct them from Denver and Washington. And indeed, it went week after week after week. Now, in the interim, I was borrowing money from Navy Relief in order to buy groceries and pay the rent, but that certainly wasn't paying the bills. I had a sweetheart and 2 babies, and man, I was up against the wall, and the wolves began to circle. I panicked and figured, wow, I've got to get some kind of a part-time job. And so I went to the newspaper, and I was reading these ads that talked about how, this is 1955, by the way, how I could make an extra $1,000 a month, okay, without interfering with my regular job. That's good money today. A lot of people would like an extra $1,000 a month. So anyway, I'd answer these ads and was always very disappointed because what were they? They were sales jobs. Those were blind ads, and they were bringing people in to interview them, to seduce them, induce them, if you would, into their business. And I kept saying, well, no, I can't do this, and they weren't arguing with me because I was totally unprepared to do anything like that. I was a stutterer, had been since I was about 6 years old, and was a painful impediment that got in the way of my life a lot. As a little kid, I was punished for stuttering, sent to bed without supper for stuttering. I got slapped for it. I got disciplined. I got teased and cajoled by my peer group. Even teachers, adults, would tease me for stuttering, would mock me and mimic. And boy, there was a rage developing in me, but it was also an introversion. I was very introverted, very quiet, kind of antisocial, just kind of getting my way from one moment to the next the best way that I possibly could, and selling just seemed totally out of the question. And I think they were pleased because it's uncomfortable to have someone around that has that kind of an impediment. There's no question. One day I was sitting at home, and there was a knock on the door, and it turned out to be a young fellow who wanted to sharpen our kitchen knives. I thought that was a pretty good idea because I knew ours were dull. And he came in and proceeded to show us a product that I fell in love. I just think, wow. Wanted to buy it for my wife, who cooked every single day, and yet didn't have the proper tools, and I knew it. But there was no way that I could buy them. Had no money for a deposit or whatever. This young salesman said, why don't you go to work for the company? You know, they're hiring, he said, and you can make some extra money that way. And I explained to him I couldn't sell, and he said, oh, in this case, you don't have to worry about that, because this product, what? Sells itself. Now, you've heard that kind of thing before. I was naive enough to accept that because he was terrible. He was not very good at what he was doing, and indeed, the product had spoken for itself, and I really wanted to buy. And so I thought, well, maybe in this case he's right. So I agreed to meet him on a Thursday evening. If any of you have had any experience inviting people to meetings, you know what happens. Most people don't show up. And I understand that now because I nearly didn't show up. All kinds of things went on in my mind about why I shouldn't show up, and what was I thinking, and there's no way that I could do this. And I've created all kinds of monsters in my mind. Something drew me to the office. I actually, even right up to the parking lot, thought about leaving. I mean, I was really in a state of severe stress. It was an upstairs office, and I kind of went upstairs, and I walked by the office and where they had this meeting, and there was a whole bunch of guys and gals in there, and I kind of went by and kind of looked for my host, and he wasn't there. And I went way down the end of the hall and got my dauber up and went around, and I went back and I looked in, and, you know, and I didn't see my host. And I went in. Don't know what took me in there, but I went in, and these guys were singing songs. They were passing out trophies. I had never seen anything like that before. People celebrating what they were doing. I'd never seen anything like that before, and I thought, this is exciting. And I got captivated, and I agreed to come up Saturday for training. We're going to have another meeting Saturday morning, and meanwhile they gave me this book to read over, a little sales manual, and I went home and I stayed up all night nearly reading that book. I was consumed by it. Read some things that stuck in my mind that I've referred to every single day since. Pretty fascinating. Went up Saturday morning, and there was another meeting just like that. And the meeting was over, and I was kind of waiting for someone to adopt me, to take me out in the field. And I couldn't make eye contact with anybody. No one would look at me. Everybody was preoccupied and moving around, and I just kind of internalized that. We tend to do that, you know. We assume that they don't want to train us. Actually, the truth of the matter was that I found out later that a lot of people come to those meetings, get all excited and jazzed up, and then they go home. They don't go out to work. Not at all untypical. I noticed, too, that many times after the meeting, there's meetings going on in the parking lot afterwards. People standing by their cars and chatting and what have you. I've often wondered about that. Anyway, at the end of the meeting, Jay Hauser, the manager at the time, said, well, do you think you could sell this stuff? And what do you say in a case like that? Of course. I mean, and so he said, well, I'll tell you what, you go ahead and pay your bond fee, and I'll go ahead and give you a sample kit. And I didn't have any money. I had no money. And he said, well, do you have a watch? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, I'll take your watch as a collateral. I thought he was the greatest guy in the world. I mean, you talk about naive. I gave him my watch, then he gave me a sample kit with some samples to give away as I knocked on the door in an attempt to show my product. Well, I could hardly wait to get started. I went downstairs and put all my gear in. I jumped in, and I took down the, is it pedometer or odometer? Odometer. Odometer reading. I wanted to do everything for internal revenue. And I took off. Couldn't wait to get started. And I drove the car, and I drove it, and couldn't wait to get started. And pretty soon, I'd get overwhelmed, and I'd quit. And then I'd drive for a while, and I'd rehire myself. I'd get remotivated. I'm going to do it. And I'd drive some more. Drove 189 city miles that day. 189 city miles. Took me nearly 6 hours. Frozen to the wheel, fleeing the possibility. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Had no idea why, because I sure wanted to. I'm so glad that day happened, because I've had a lot of empathy about that ever since. A lot of people just don't understand. Why just don't go to work, they say. Well, maybe some of you had the experience. In fact, typically when I address these issues, I get a lot of knowing looks and nods. Say they've been through that same experience. It's fascinating. Finally, I quit after about 6 times. I just figured, I just can't do it. And I was heading home. I knew when I got home, my wife would pat me on the poo-poo and feed me and send me back with my sample kit, you know, and that'd be the end of that sales career. On the way home, though, something happened. I got mad. Oh, I went into a rage. And I just decided I was going to knock on a door, and if they gave me any trouble, excuse me, but I'd knock their damn head off. Because I could do that. I've been a boxer in the Navy, all Navy, and heavyweight champion of the Mid-South. I could handle the physical stuff, but it was this other mystery that I couldn't manage. Terrible. To make a long story short, I knocked on the door, and the guy let me in. And I proceeded to put on the most clumsy, inept, inadequate, I think maybe in a couple of instances, inappropriate sales call the mind can conceive. And I wouldn't be talking about this unless what? He bought. And I took credit for selling it, but he bought. In other words, indeed, the product had spoken for itself. Okay? He got right past me. He didn't let me get in the way. He bought the product. Great sales lesson, by the way. A great sales lesson. That as we proceed together, possibly in other events and what have you, we'll talk about what was really happening there and how we could benefit on that. When I went out of that house, I celebrated. I knew somehow I had found my place. I don't think I had a more exciting moment in my life up to that point in time. Oh, and I knew I was a salesman. You know, you take full credit for it. Jumped in the car and then proceeded to drive all the way home to celebrate. I'm talking maybe 20, 25-minute drive home. Had dinner and dawdled. You know what I mean? I found things to occupy myself and what have you. And finally, my wife had the audacity to suggest what? Then I go out and get another one, like it was easy or something. And so I couldn't say no, so there I am in the car, what? Driving around again. It took me until 9 o'clock that night to stop the car 4 times and knock on 4 doors and get in 4 houses and make 4 sales. That was the best day I had in 6 years in Cutco Cutlery. My first day was the best day I had. I wish we had the time to examine that with you. Incredible. That night, I recruited my first person. I knew I'd been lonely out there, and somehow I figured out that if I could have someone attending with me, a trainee, someone to work with, it would have been a little bit easier. You know, safety in numbers and what have you. A sense of responsibility to someone rather than just to myself in trying to make a sale. It was the first of thousands upon thousands of recruits in the subsequent years. Like I say, that was my first day and my best day for a long, long time. After about 10 days, though, I had fallen in love with the free enterprise system. I really liked the idea. Develop some skills, work hard, make a lot of money, find a lot of freedom, punch your own clock, and if you don't, you won't. That was about as fair as it seemed to get. When you stop and think about it, how can it be more fair than that? No limit to the number of hours I could work and no limit to my paycheck. I thought that was pretty cool. Thankfully, my recruiting ability allowed me to survive for the first 2 years. Made a few dollars in override, but I had a terrible time in this movement, if you would. I was reading the books, listening to the tapes, going to the seminars, doing everything I could to break those barriers, and nothing seemed to work. In 1957, my enlistment was about up, and I wanted to go full-time. You know, just leave the Navy and go full-time into selling. Pretty irrational consideration when you think about it, because let me explain. At that time, you know how companies keep score? You know, they have standings and what have you? At that time, there was about 1,500 managers with Alcoa in its various direct sales divisions. In other words, that was Cutco, Wherever Cookware, and a Sterling Silver Company, all subsidiaries of Alcoa. And they had about 1,500 managers internationally, and at any given week or month, after having been a manager, by the way, for nearly the 2 years, I was around 1,200th any given week or month. I mean, not very good. It wouldn't justify leaving the military with its security, its medical benefits, and knowing exactly what I was going to do. And by the way, I enjoyed the military. Never had a bad day. 10 years in the Navy, and I can't reflect on a bad day when I wished I wasn't in there. You know, but that wasn't the point. The free enterprise system had beckoned me. Okay. There was a fellow in the Cutco office who saw my dilemma and said, I got a couple of people I'd like to introduce you to. Oh, that's great. Took me to a bookstore, and he bought a recording. It was a 78 RPM. See, this is 1957 now. A 78 RPM. That's pretty ancient. And that record was The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale. An astounding piece of work. The beginning of a whole industry, by the way. The Strangest Secret was the first so-called motivational training tape or record made in the industry. And since then, it has become a billion-dollar industry. Self-improvement, motivation, and this type of thing. But that was the beginning. And I listened to that over and over and over again. He also had bought me a book called I Can by Dr. Ben Sweetland. It was a primer in that field of auto-conditioning and affirmations and what have you. And I read that over and over again. And it didn't seem to make any difference. I mean, I was accumulating information, but it didn't seem to make any difference in what was happening in my field. One day I was driving up University Avenue in San Diego, And I had a moment, a revelation, an insight. Actually, I realize now that it was a collative thought, not a creative one. All this stuff I'd been accumulating over the past 2 years seemed to somehow come together in a flash of understanding. And what I realized at that point was that what I had been doing for the first quarter century of my life was reacting to circumstances and accommodating people and conditions. Now you might look and say, well, so what does that mean? See, reacting to circumstances and accommodating people and conditions. Most of us do that. In fact, I would think most people, everybody does that. But I realized I had never had to do that again unless I chose to. I had a choice about that. Now, what I'm saying is this. In that moment, for whatever reason, I recognized that rather than reacting to circumstances, I could become one. In other words, I could put myself out there, initiate an effort, okay, that other people would have to react or respond to. That was their business. Follow what I'm saying? I just turned it around, became proactive, in other words, instead of reactive. And I could establish conditions that other people, because it's their nature to do so, would probably accommodate. All I had to do was have integrity about it. Because I had to establish conditions that were fair, contributive, service-oriented, and then they would have to accommodate that. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't do business. For example, let me give you a little illustration of that. In my first 2 years, I had hundreds of back calls. As I'd show a product, people would be excited about the product, and they would avoid making a decision and say they wanted to think it over. Okay? And then they'd say, come back at the first of the month, or come back in a week, or whatever. And I'd go back, you know, sure that this was going to work out, and it never did. I don't think I ever sold a back call. And I thought, I'm not going to do that anymore. In other words, I decided I'm never going to make another back call. Well, that means you're not going to write any business. Well, no, not necessarily. To make a long story short, I began to establish a condition that I would live by 100%. And that was when I started a presentation, I would let people know that they should put on a decision-making cap. You know, that they should listen carefully and ask any questions they'd like. I'd be as candid and honestly as I possibly could, but understand that at the end they should give me a simple yes or no. No, yes, Bern, we like the product, no reason why we shouldn't go ahead. Or, no, Bern, we're just not interested. And either way was 100% okay with me. All I wanted was a decision. Would they do that? And I mean, it's amazing how many people say, yeah, I'll do that. Okay? I didn't get them to agree to buy. I just asked them to what? Make a decision. I established a condition. My closing ratio soared. It soared. Just amazing. That's what I mean by establishing a condition that other people, because it's their nature to do so, would probably accommodate. I mean, I would have people go to every length trying to get me to break that bond, that agreement. You don't have to come to the house, we'll meet you in a coffee shop. I'm different than other people. I know that most people don't buy on a second call, but we do. Please come back. I just wouldn't do it. No, that was the deal. And so they would end up buying. In fact, I'd offer to send another salesman. I said, if indeed that's what you want to do, I'll be happy to send another salesman, and I'm sure they'll appreciate the business. And I would tell who some of these people were that would come, because I wasn't going to go back. And if I had been adoptable, if I had done a good, ethical, enthusiastic job, there was an adoption that would have taken place where they didn't want another salesman to come back. It didn't seem fair that someone else would get the credit, and so they would end up making the decision. Now, that doesn't work if they're not interested. That doesn't work if they're not prospects. That doesn't work if they can't afford it. You understand what I'm saying? When we're not saying that. Not high pressure, extremely low pressure. Just having an understanding, establishing a condition that other people would probably accommodate. Now, I just inserted that only to say that this was what I meant, right? To initiate and to establish conditions. I could go on all day long giving you case histories of very successful people that we've trained in the past who establish conditions that other people have to accommodate. And they're inevitably vastly more successful than they were prior to the time they were doing it. Very, very important. But that's an issue for another essay. The point I was going to make, once I had that psychic shift, that mental maneuver that I just explained, 90 days later, 3 short months, not much time at all, time enough, okay, for me to make a final decision, I was #1 internationally with the same company. Same product, same price, same territory, same office, same wife, same car. All the denominators were the same, except this mental maneuver that I'd made, this commitment to conduct myself in a certain way. It's incredible, incredible. From there, you see things differently than you do from down here. Does that make sense? There's a whole different perspective. And from there, I recognized a couple things. First of all, from here, looking back on the experience, I recognized a very exciting issue, and that was that it appeared that by the time I got to be around 900th in the company, it was the same thing as being at 100. Do you understand that? Yeah, in other words, by the time I'd got to 900, it was the same thing as being at 100. Now, that's not going to occur normally to the mind. So what is that? What I noticed and continue to notice over the last half century, that between here there's a milling mass of people distinguishing themselves and not functioning. This week a guy will lead the nation, and next week he won't have any business. This week someone will work hard and not make a single sale, and next week he'll run right into a bunch of it. You understand me? In other words, they just kind of mill around in there. Imagine a milling mass of people in a room. And at any given time, they may be at the front or the back, depending upon circumstances. It was amazing. And so I was a lot closer to #1 than I imagined. Most of us are. Here's another thing I noticed, too. It became very clear that the fact there was no ladder to success. It's kind of a phrase that's been bantered about all of our lives. I've heard, oh yeah, you got to climb the ladder of success. And I'm here to tell you that's not true. That is not true. There's no ladder. There's no ladder. Stephen Covey in some of his presentations talks about how you finally climb the ladder of success and you realize it's been against the wrong wall. I mean, it's not where you wanted to be after all, you know? Yeah, I'm saying there's no ladder. If there had been a ladder, I would have had to do 1,200, 1,100, 1,009, 800, 700, 605, 400, 300, and you know, the higher you get, the harder it gets. You know, 200, 100, finally breaking through, right? I mean, that's what they have to do. Actually, it's not that good, 100 at a time. A subconscious mind, when it gets a hold of this idea, climb the ladder of success, how do you climb a ladder? One rung at a time. What the subconscious mind feels, okay, is 1,200, 1,199, 1,198, 1,197, 1,196, 1,195, oops, 1,197. Did you hear that? Occasional slip back. I mean, by the time you get to 900, no wonder people settle in. You know, they're meeting their quotas, they're paying the rent, things are pretty good, they got a chance now to take a vacation. No, they settle, rather than saying, all I got to do is to mingle and move and move my way across the room and step into excellence. It's that close. See, you have to understand that all around us there are people who are excelling in what they're doing. And they're no brighter, they're no better looking, have no more education than the masses who seem to be struggling. So you say, well, what's the difference? See, I began to listen carefully, and I reflected on those 2 years, and I kept examining in subsequent years, wondering what else is there besides those 2 revelations, that rather than reacting to circumstances, I could become one, and rather than accommodating, I could establish conditions that other people would accommodate. Rather than those 2 little insights, what else there might be? Is there a whole array of ideas like that that could make a difference? I was looking around, and what I heard was kind of a mainstream of aphorisms and admonitions and old conventional wisdoms, if you would, that people just kind of succumb to, and they banter it about one to the other, managers to their employees or parents to their children. Things like, oh, maybe you've heard some of this. Sweetheart, if you're going to be successful and happy and fulfilled, you're going to have more self-confidence. Ever hear that? How many times do you think that's been said to somebody? It's part of our culture. We just think that way. Practice makes perfect. Forgive and forget. You know, stitch in time saves 9. It goes on and on. In selling, of course, it's don't take no for an answer. You got to get good at handling and overcoming objections. Anybody ever heard that one? It's common languaging. Let's see, you close the number of times they say no plus 1. Oh, it goes on and on. Oh, forgive and forget. Did we mention that one? That's not true. It's not going to happen. There's no erasure of synapses in the human mind after 6 years old. So we kind of get stuck with this stuff. I know this, I recognized a long time ago, that if we could take and pile, all in one big pile, all the self-help books and sales books, all the cassettes and all the videos and the DVs and the, you know, the DVDs and the CDs and what have you, and the dead bodies of all these seminar speakers, and you put them in one big pile, what have you got? A mountain of stuff. A mountain, maybe a mountain range of material. And it's all exciting and interesting, and I've enjoyed and benefited from most of it. However, you've got to look at something. All of this teaching, all this talking has resulted in something here. In society at large, Pareto's formula prevails. 80% of all results in our society is coming out of 20% of the people. It's a formula that works in your church, your club, your community, your family. In other words, 80% of the results are coming out of 20% of the people. A mathematician and philosopher named Pareto thought that up, and it's incredibly accurate, incredibly accurate. In direct selling, okay, where people break free of the traditional job relationship and salary and all expenses paid, and they kind of venture out by themselves, independent contractors. Some of them are real estate, some of them are insurance, this type of thing. It's 90-10. There's 90% of the money is enjoyed, 90% of the income is appreciated by only 10% of the participants. Only 10%. And I mean, this is accurate. This is accurate out here. I was in an insurance office here about 3 years ago and met this young fellow. And his first year in that office, had 18 salespeople in the office. His maiden voyage, his first year, his freshman effort, okay? And he sold 60%, actually about 62% of all the business in that office that year. How was that even possible? You know, people say, well, he sold his friends. No, he purposely didn't do that. See, what was it that made it so effective, efficient for him, and the rest of them were just kind of struggling and hanging out there? Kind of fascinating. In multi-level marketing or network marketing, which, by the way, has spawned more millionaires than any other industry on the planet, I have phone pals and buddies that I've met and worked with and what have you, who enjoy incomes of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000. The high one so far in my life was a guy named Mark Yarnell, who was making, and when I last met him, was making $770,000. That's all, by the way, per month income, per month, with no overhead, no employees, no inventories, just a free agent. I mean, you tell those people, oh, that don't work. You know, don't get into that stuff. No one makes any money. Well, convince these guys of that. 97, though, see, 97% of all the money is enjoyed by only 3% of the people. Now, that's okay. I mean, let's kind of take it into the business community. If you go to any niche newspaper, any paper in the company, and every week you look in where the people are filing fictitious names, they call it, or they're DBAs, doing business as, there are startup companies galore, thousands and thousands of them. And 90% of them are going to fail in the first 5 years. 90% will go down. For those remaining, another 5 years, another 90% will succumb. another 97%, leaving a net gain of 3% of all business startups will eventuate enduring. Now, this doesn't indict going into business for yourself. This doesn't indict network marketing, and it doesn't indict direct selling, certainly, and we can't indict society. After all, we have to live there. Okay? It's not an indictment of this. It is, however, something we have to look at. Why is that so when all these people have comparable educations, good, healthy minds, you know, attractive bodies, are able to function? Why is there such a disbalance here? So I figure, okay, if you listen to all of this, you think, it's kind of like this morning I had a discussion at home. Person says, you know, this person asked two of us, there was two of us standing there, he said, if you had a son who was graduating from high school and he was a great athlete, do you think if he got a chance that he should become a professional athlete, or should he go to college and get his education? And the other fellow right away said, oh, he should go to college. And I said, oh, he should become a professional. You know, and boy, they thought that was just terrible. The fact remains, you know, there's two things I was considering. He better go pro while he can, because he went to college, he could get hurt and not have a professional career, not enjoy that bonus of millions of dollars that they're willing to pay these kids for their excellence. Who's that young basketball player? The guy is financially independent the rest of his life because he decided to play a sport.
Yeah, but does he know what to do with it, how to protect it?
Oh,
he doesn't.
There's a lot of people are going to coach him to get a consultant, to get a tax man. Now, if he don't, that's another issue. But that same mind that wouldn't bother doing that is going to join the ranks of thousands of people that I know who have college degrees that can't get a job. Is it your mom? Has a degree in sociology, and she's working as a sales clerk in a Long's drugstore. I mean, it's just amazing out here. I've had so many people in my life who are well educated and unable to make a living for themselves. Unable to make a living. And so, all I'm saying is it's so easy to get succumb to these general concepts, and you think, I got 22 millionaires I've spawned since 1972. One of them had a 7th grade education. Several of them never graduated from high school. Most of them graduated from high school, and I believe it was 2 guys had a degree. No one had a master's. And yet every one of them have had masters working for them. You know what I mean? And so you have to say, whoa, what is this about? What is this about? In other words, you have to look at what's happening, because we need not be satisfied. We've got to challenge these results. These results. This is not speak well. Okay, here's what we did. I decided, this isn't bad stuff, I'm not saying that. It's just not giving us the results that we all dream about in the richest land in the world. Now, if only 3% of our population in the United States becomes financially independent, 3%, what percentage is that of the rest of the world? Couldn't even measure it, wouldn't even get on the chart. You know, and yet all around the planet, these entities come into the world, and they have a brain, and they can see and hear and feel and smell and taste and remember and imagine and make choices and decisions, but they just don't get prepared. They don't get prepared. I thought, okay, here's what we need to do. I stepped outside the mainstream and took what I call an obtuse position with all of this. Not to just refute it, but to challenge it, okay? And began to realize, for example, that a lot of things that we hear just don't really work very well. They're not the real truth of the matter. And a lot of it is based on semantics. Now, when it comes to languaging and words and communication and what have you, we've heard a lot about vocabulary. There's no question that the better vocabulary a person has, the better thinking they can do, because we think with words. Okay? We imagine in pictures, but we think with words, and so the more words that you have to select from and what have you, the better thinking you can do, and perhaps the better decisions you can make. There's no question the vocabulary pays. I should never stop developing one. I don't think there's been a day gone by in my life when I haven't gone to the dictionary just to double check something, to make sure that's what it really meant. There's another thing I'm looking for too. Vocabulary, grammar is another issue, which is really the study of putting those words that we've learned in proper order so that they make sense, okay? And we have a natural instinct for that. If you notice a little child has maybe 10 words in their vocabulary, they'll put them grammatically in the proper order. It's something that happens between the ages of 3 and 7, that if it doesn't happen there, it may never happen. Really fascinating. It's a real challenge. If you don't get attuned to the grammar of your language, you may never be very good at it. They say it happens in the young mind. We're managing pretty well here, but it's semantics. What is that? It's a study of the impact that words have on our psyche. And those words have impact, there's no question about it. Some words more so than others. But it's the semantics of this thing that can make all the difference in the world. And that's some of the things that we'll be talking about. Out of that, after working with this for several years, I began to realize that we had what I call the Qwertyiops of life. I don't know if you're familiar with the word or not. It's pronounced Qwertyiops. Qwertyiops. A Qwertyiops is a admonition, an aphorism, a conventional wisdom that really doesn't work very well. That actually diminishes people rather than accelerating them. And we're not conscious of it. For example, what will happen to us if we're not aware is that something will be said often enough where it's no longer challenged. A question doesn't even come up, we just accept it as a truth. And so actually what's happened is that we no longer have an idea, we no longer have a phrase, it has us. It's got us, okay? And we succumb to that. And all I'm saying is we need to put a thinking cap on and say, okay, let's take a look at this. Let me give you an illustration of a Qwertyiops. As a matter of fact, I can pass some of these out and then we can I'll give you one of these colored ones. Now, after a while, you'll come up with some of your own. Put this in the back. See, before we get too deep into this, why do we bother? What's going on here? Let me explain experiences that I've had over the last, nearly half a century. There is an industry out here, a profession actually. It's a causative environment where people go into business for themselves as salespeople or networkers. And the reason they do that is that they've been led to believe that they can enter this profession, this industry, okay, and after a learning curve, after some training and what have you, emerge out here and grow from the experience, okay? There's this personal growth and professional development and what have you, and they grow from the experience, which means typically more dollars, more freedom, and more security, and a higher esteem. That's the intention, okay? What I've been watching is that, thousands upon thousands of people entering this environment, and the companies spend a lot of time and money teaching them about the product. Got to know the product, okay? And a lot of time is money spent on that. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. And they have scripts and programs, things to say and do to sell the product or render the service, okay? And that's about it. And that's money well spent. And yet most of these people get trapped in that birth canal and never emerge into anything significant. In fact, there's mortality periods in these industries that run from 6 hours. Some people last 6 hours. It nearly happened to me. You understand what I mean? In other words, in my first 6 hours, it could have been over. 6 days is a critical period. I've seen a lot of people get into selling and they're gone in 6 days, in a week. They realize they can't handle it. What happens oftentimes is that their weaknesses and shortcomings come bubbling up like cream on milk, okay, and they realize, whoa, and they kind of skip away before anyone else finds out. You know, their loved ones, their sweetheart and what have you, knows they run back to a job. Not wrong, it's just, that's what happens to them. 3 months is a big critical period. Person gets past 3 months, he's probably going to be around a year. It just seems to happen that way. If you can get past 6 weeks, you can make it to 3 months. At 3 months is a big drop-off. If you get through 3 months, typically the guy will endure a year. If they get through the year's anniversary within a matter of 20 or 30 days either way, then they're probably going to last 2. No, they'll scoot on through that second year in pretty good shape. The second year, major drop-off. Call it sophomoric blues. And if you get past 2 years, it goes to 5. And I've seen people drop out at 5 who are making substantial sums of money. They just disappear out of the industry. I mean, it's fairly common, really common. What we want to do, a lot of people kind of, even those who endure, they get way out here and they haven't grown very much. You can run into these people and you say, well, how long have you been in the business? Like, how long have you been selling suits here at Men's Wearhouse? Oh, been here 13 years. You know that's not true. They've been there 1 year 13 times. Because they were as good in 1 year as they've become in 13. They just kind of been hanging out. Okay, actually it's probably not that good. It's probably 6 months, 26 times. In fact, I tend to think it's probably 3 months, what would it be, 52 times, is where they've been there. Because I tell a lot of people when they come into selling, you apply yourself. Okay, you apply yourself, absorb this material, and in 3 months, you're going to be about 85% as good as you'll ever be. Now's the time to make a decision. It's just, it happens very, very quickly, very quickly. That extra 15% is significant, of course, major. And so everything we've been doing, it's not wrong, it's just not sufficient. It became apparent, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that what it is, that something did or did not happen back here. Something was said or not said back here before they ever came to the table that de-prepared them. It's not that they're unprepared. Most of us have been de-prepared from doing the very things that will create huge incomes for us. De-prepared. What does that mean? Well, for example, I'll ask people, is it possible, say you got a sales force of 30, 40 people, I'll say, is it possible that something happened at home last night, or maybe didn't happen? Something was said or maybe not said that would affect your efficiency and your impact today. And 100% of them will go, oh yeah. Well, is it possible something could have happened last week that would affect today? Yep. How about last month, a year ago, a decade ago? Maybe when you were 6. Maybe when you were 6. In other words, you take a child the other day, for example. I saw a little girl, handsome mother, healthy people, had a big, nice SUV coming out of Raley's. And a little girl somehow had put her mother off, had made her feel uncomfortable in her conduct. And she grabbed that little girl and picked her up and threw her into the cab. I mean, not through the door, but opened it and threw her into the seat and said, just get buckled in. And she was exasperated. You know how we can get. That little kid was cocooning, trying to disappear, trying not to make any more trouble. Now, can that have a permanent effect? There's no question about it. Exasperation can be diminishing, can be diminishing. Do you think, for example, that any little kid ever heard a parent say, shut up? That can carry the rest of your lifetime. Because now you got to go out in the field and meet people, and you're scared to death that what? Someone's going to say, shut up. Someone's going to be exasperated because you're there. You know how painful that was the other day? That little gal who took a position about your being there and made a decision that she had no right to make. It's painful. And it's not just that event, it's comparable to something that might have happened in the past. And so what I'm saying is that we've been de-prepared. And so out of all of this, we've developed about probably 60 hours worth of material that says, hey, let's take another look. Let's take another look to see what this is all about. And Qwertyiops is a beginning where we become conscious so that we can become conscientious about what we're thinking and saying, conveying, and kind of integrating. Is it really having an effect? Let's go back, for example, and talk about to be successful and happy, you've got to have more self-confidence. Let's examine that for a second. Bad languaging. Bad languaging. And yet, we've all heard it, probably have said it. Let me give you an illustration. If I say to Erica, Erica, if you're going to be fulfilled and happy and successful in your life, you're going to have more self-confidence. Okay? What have I just implied?
You don't have
that you don't have whatever that is, and that you need that to move forward and get better. And if you can't figure out what to do about that or what that means, because is it likely you're going to say, oh, okay, I got self-confidence? I don't think so. And so what I've done really is to kind of close a door on you and not meeting to it all. It's so common. That's a Qwertyiops. It's a popular admonition that denigrates and diminishes people. You have to be careful about this stuff. It's kind of like, we talk a lot about self-esteem. In fact, let's kind of take a moment and look at this carefully. Self-confidence. Self-esteem. Pretty well accepted that we need self-esteem. I'm saying that's bad language. It's bad languaging. In the industry that I'm in and what I do, you can imagine how many times I have heard self-improvement. Ever hear self-improvement? Yeah. No such thing. What is he talking about? What do you mean, no such thing? It's pretty clear, when you stop and think about it, that the brain, the mind, is not equipped to educate itself. Can't do it. Isn't that eerie? Two examples. One, if you put a little baby in an empty, dimly lit room with no stimuli, okay, and you feed the baby tasteless pablum, keeping it alive, okay, for say 20 years, and then you say, okay, come on out, sweetheart. What comes out of the room? Somewhat of a mature body, if it's still alive, because of marasmus is the thing. If you're not getting touched and stroked and caressed, you could die as a young child. But anyway, if it comes out of the room, it's going to be a somewhat mature body in a little baby brain. There's no advancement at all. Let's take another illustration. Take 100 of the finest minds in the world. I mean, these guys are, they got it together. Physicists and psychologists and sociologists and, you name it. And you put them in a room, say a room this size, 100 of them, and you feed them, and you allow them to toilet, and they can shower and clean up and what have you, but they can't communicate. No communicating. No note-taking, no sign language. You just kind of exist in there, okay? And you spend, say 90 days in there. What's going to come out of the room? Same people that went in. Maybe a little less, because they say if you don't use it, you lose some of it. But there's no transition of ideas. See, at the same time, if you let those people communicate and argue and challenge one another and, commiserate and what have you, what's going to come out of that room? I mean, stuff maybe that'll change our whole world. What we're saying is there's no such thing as self-improvement. In other words, if there's going to be improvement, it's going to come outside of ourselves. It has to flow in from other people, other minds, other experiences, books, tapes, whatever it happens to be, and it comes into you, and you assimilate it, collate it, integrate it, and then you grow. But it has nothing to do with the self. See, here's the thing. What's this really all about? Certainly, we want all the confidence we can muster. You can't have too much confidence. Esteem, oh boy, it's essential to our well-being, okay? One thing about esteem that a lot of people don't realize, that children are totally dependent upon their esteem levels to their parents and siblings for the first, about 2.5 to 3 years. After that, their esteem will grow in proportion, and by the way, esteem will continue to grow in proportion to the esteem that they grant other people. In other words, they've proven this, by the way, biologically in laboratories, that when we elevate someone, when we applaud them and confirm them and regard them and edify them, we are elevated by that experience. This is why it's so important. I remember, for example, some time ago, David, our grandson, who was at the time was about 6 years old, met a fellow called Paul Russell. And his dad introduced them, and David said, "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Russell." You know, he'd been trained to kind of be appropriate and what have you. He said, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Russell," and offered his hand. And the fellow said, "Hey, Mr. Russell's my dad, you can just call me Paul." And so Ross, and I was there, and Ross said, "Whoops, y'all excuse us, Paul, would you come with me for a minute?" And he took Paul aside, and he said, "Would you do me a favor?" And Paul said, "Well, sure. What? Go back and take the Mr. back. Go back and explain to David, Yeah, it perhaps is best if you call me Mr. Russell. Just explain that to him. He said, well, please do it. He needs that. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, David enjoyed a higher level of esteem by granting it. By granting. And they know it. They know it. Some time ago, I had a seminar on a Saturday morning, and a Big Brother, you know, the organization where they take a kid and they kind of nurture him. Big Brother brought his little brother, and the little brother was about 14. And they came, and they were sitting back there about 4 or 5 rows. And this kid had his hat on, okay, and was kind of slouched over to the side. You know how the kids do it these days. And we were talking, and I was celebrating the fact that he came, and we were chatting, getting ready to get started. And so I kind of sidled over and stood beside him. Okay, his name was Jonah. And I said, Jonah? Kind of looked at me, you know? And I said, do me a favor? The hat. Man, he reached up and whipped it off. He knew. He took that hat off and put it in his lap, kept it off all day, very attentive. Changed his whole demeanor. Changed his whole demeanor. That evening, sometimes we need certification. You know, we need to hear some feedback. And the Big Brother called me that evening and said, I think you should know you really created a fan today. I said, what do you mean? And he said, Jonah, on the way home, he said, boy, that guy is really cool. You understand? In other words, he knew I cared about him. He knew somehow out of that gesture. It's so easy not to bother. So easy not to bother. But the thing is, it is not appropriate to wear your hat indoors. We kind of get used to it, and people adapt to it. Eating at a restaurant with a hat on, there was a day when there'd be someone who would come over and knock it off. It's not appropriate. We've got kids, for example, when mom leaves the table and comes back, they stand up. Or if a woman enters the room, they'll stand up. They do it for their sake. I mean, their esteem is elevated by this. You understand? We need to learn how to see sir and yes sir and no sir is an important part of the development of a young mind, because their esteem will be in proportion to that they grant. Anyway, improvement, certainly we want all that we can get. Read and study and think and plan and visit and attend these kind of events and what have you, certainly. So what's the problem? The semantical problem here is the word self. Get rid of it if you possibly can. It's a bad term. Why? It kind of signifies a single entity. Doesn't it? I mean, self means me. You know what I mean? It's I. See, we refer to this single entity with the words like I and me and my and you and what have you. And the challenge is that every time we do that, we create a problem and not even conscious of it. It's a semantical problem. What are you talking about? Let's look at this. I don't pretend to be an artist, but that's a profile. And we're going to talk here about our minds for a second. The minds that we really must come to know. We've all got one, and we tend to take it for granted. There's not many parties celebrating the mind. You know, I don't think many people wake up in the morning and go, wow, you know, I've got a mind. And that's kind of a tragedy in a way, because it's incredible. It's the most magnificent entity in the universe. Nothing can compare to it. 115 billion brain cells that, when stimulated, send out little dendrites looking for collation. And when little dendrites hit together inside the mind, you got a synapse all of a sudden, which is almost like an explosion of light and intellect. Because every synapse that's formed by those cells, by sending out little dendrites looking for collation, creates a word, a new awareness, a new skill, okay? And the number of synapses in your mind and mine, and everyone in the room and everyone in the city and on the planet, every mind has the potential number of synapses in it equal to the number of grains of sand coupled with all the droplets of water on the planet. How dare we take that for granted? Yeah, this is a pretty important thing. But the Creator played a trick. And I don't think he meant it to be a trick, but somehow we got caught up in, control issues and authority and Qwertyiops and what have you, and we lost the message. Here's the thing. Every mind is trichotomous in its nature. Trichotomous. Once in a while, someone will say, "Oh, Bern, you use all those big words." Well, not really. Let's get really. Dichotomous, you're familiar with. What does dichotomy mean? Exact opposites. Up, down, rich, poor, good, bad. Those are dichotomies. A trichotomy where you have three different postures in potential conflict. Three. And that's what's going on in every mind in our lives, every mind. Everyone has what we refer to as a subconscious mind, sometimes called a subliminal mind, often referred to as the unconscious. Not to be unkind, but we've all had experiences where we've done something, driven a distance, and can't even remember the trip. We just kind of did it subconsciously, took over and handled it for us. Freud called this the id. It's been misunderstood ever since. There's a major understanding about this that really can help. The subconscious mind can't see, hear, feel, smell, or taste. It's not connected with the outside world. Has no way of measuring or evaluating anything. It's totally dependent upon the conscious mind to interpret experiences. We call them perceptions, okay? And this subconscious accumulates those. Does everything that's ever happened to us, okay, is stored up here in a mass of information. Okay, it's just a mass of information like a storehouse, and that compilation of all that information from the subconscious point of view is what it's all about in order to survive. This is what keeps us alive. This is a survival mechanism. Its job is to keep you alive. It regulates your heartbeat and your blood flow and what have you. No, this is a survival mechanism. Just keep you alive. That's all it cares about. This part of the mind was perfectly content, sleeping in a concrete culvert and, living in an open field, homeless people, eating out of a Dempsey dumpster. There's a part of the mind that's perfectly content. I have talked to numbers and numbers of street people who think you and I are pretty silly for going to all the trouble we do to try to make a living and whatever. They don't get it. I've known some who were just as ecstatic, just as happy about finding a new Dempsey dumpster with a different menu in it, you know what I mean, that you and I would be finding a new home. Just as excited about it. Now the mind goes, well, that'll never happen to me, but be careful. Because you wouldn't believe some of the people I've run into on the street. I don't know if you go around talking to these people or not, because it takes a, you get a little nervous doing it because you don't know how they're going to react. You don't know how they're going to behave, you know. But I've done a lot of this. I was out running one morning in Bachman Lake Park in Dallas, Texas. And I finished my run, and I noticed this guy just beginning to crawl out of his nightsack there. And he had his mobile home, you know, the shopping cart, and it was all loaded with stuff. So I took a deep breath and I went over to him and I said, "Excuse me, I just finished my run, I guess you can tell, and I was going to get some breakfast, and I understand we're not supposed to eat alone. May I get you, something from McDonald's?" And he looked at me with a certain amount of scorn. And like he said, I mean, he didn't say it, but it's like he conveyed, "I don't care if you do or not." And so I did. I went over and I got an Egg McMuffin and some orange juice and a cup of coffee and whatever, and I sat down and I kind of gave it to him. He didn't say anything. We sat there eating. And finally, I began to ask questions and probe and what have you. And I'll tell you who I was talking to. His name was Dr. Harvey, a PhD, an ex-college professor. Ex-college professor. Something had happened, it's a long story, but his family had made some choices and decisions and expelled him more or less for not getting tenure. And he tried to be accepted for who he was, not what he could do. And he was losing the battle, and one disappointment after another, and he ended up on the street. It took us months to get him back up and going again. I mean, I bought him an old clunker car, and I took him to rethread shops and got him a suit, and tried to train him to be a salesperson. That didn't work out very well. Got him a job, maintained contact. It was months before he was back in the system again. Yeah, so none of us are immune to that. The subconscious mind is a status quo pro. Status quo pro. Now, it will tend to reject anything new, even if it's an idea, a word, or a concept, or a challenge, a new job. It just doesn't want to do that. It'll choke down, and it'll go into a fear mode, which means it'll either be aggressive, it'll fight and be inappropriate, it'll short-circuit the whole process. That's what salespeople run into all the time. Or they will flee. They'll avoid conversation, or they'll just freeze up and can't even communicate. Okay, that's because of this. This doesn't have a vocabulary of its own, as it communicates to the rest of the body by feelings. Okay? In other words, if you go into a fear mode, well, you might have a sweaty palm or a shaky hand, a queasy stomach, or a shaky knee, but that's the message. It wants everything to stay just the way it is. But you remember, it's an ignorant entity. It can't see, hear, feel, smell, or taste, can't make its own choices. It can only say, whoops, something's different here. Look out. We're going to what? Die. Totally irrational. We're blessed, however, also with a massive part of the brain being conscious. The conscious mind. The intellect. Our cognitive ability. Cognitive just means that somehow we can collate information in such a way like we know there's a Thursday and there's going to be another one. A cognitive entity who knows there's someone across the horizon they could care about and influence. That's what I mean. In other words, just the cognitive ability. This, by the way, is the ego. And it's a thriving mechanism because it can see, hear, feel, smell, and taste. Therefore, it wants to go, do, be, and have. Though the conscious mind sees what's available and will grasp at it, wants to do it. Okay? It's a thriving mechanism. Now, do you think that these ever get in conflict? All day long, every day. There's a constant battle running there. And if you're not conscious of the battle, who wins? Well, what do you hope wins, actually? The survival mechanism. You'll tend to stay right where you are. You tend to stay right where you are. Now, we're also blessed with a conscience. C-O-N-S-C-I-E-N-C-E, conscience. Darwin found, for example, that all mammals have an identifiable conscience. There was a tiger in the jungle violating a law of its own species will skulk away with guilt. You've seen a dog, I mean, just obviously guilty in the way it behaves. But all mammals have a conscience. In fact, it was because of that Darwin was not an atheist. A lot of people say Darwin was an atheist, but he wasn't. He was a deist. And what he did, he said, for this to occur, okay, there had to be a cause for all of this. And see, he spelled cause with a capital C. That was how he identified a creator and identity, a God, if you would. But it was cause. Something, something brought it together. Pretty exciting stuff. Each of us have this working all the time. And so, if you can imagine, with a large audience without a camera here, I'd bring up 3 people and stand them kind of close together, facing each other. Let's say, imagine if you would, Erica, you're standing right here, okay? And we'll get James up here, and he'll stand right here. Now, if we bound ourselves together with a silver strand that we'll call a bond, okay, and said, okay, you're going to have to be this close, you can't untie or cut this cord for the next 90 days. Would that be a problem for you? And I know it would be for James, and I know it would be for me. Why? Because each of us has our own agenda. Places to go, things to do, people to see, you know what I mean, things to accomplish. And we have moments of privacy that we'd be humiliated to have someone present. And hopefully, if you're lucky, you have moments of intimacy that you would want to have imposed upon. Here's the thing, though. Would you exist? Would you be alive 90 days from now? Oh, yeah. You'd manage to find a way. Would there be some tugging and pulling and negotiating having to go on? Of course, okay? But you would survive. You'd adapt to that, in other words. You would adapt to that. And then the 90th day comes and we cut you apart. How would you feel? Disoriented and alone and segmented. You know what I mean? You'd have to what? Re-adapt. You'd have to get back to your own trichotomy again. This is what's happening all the time. And so when we say self, we refute that relationship. We're going right past it. What I suggest to a lot of people, if you remain conscious of this, you can get in command of it. You can let that conscious mind, can you imagine what you could accomplish if you had an unfettered conscious mind? In other words, whatever you chose to do, okay, you went ahead and did it bravely, courageously, efficiently, anything. What could you accomplish? It'd be incredible. Because you all have dreams. See, how many dreams die right here in the mind? You know, you have this great idea and it never gets out of the mind. It just dies right there because of this trichotomy. Subconscious gets in the way, and the conscious says, well, you sure you really want to do that? You know, this kind of thing. Yeah, and it dies. Or it dies on the drawing board or in a boardroom. It never gets past that. All I'm saying is if we could unfetter that, I mean, we'd have a bright, you know, much more enriched world. There's no question about it. So the idea is to be conscious of this, and one of the ways of doing that is to think of yourselves, purposely plural, as a we. As if every time you say, we're going to go to the store, we're going to go prospecting, we, all you're doing is checking into your trichotomy. I've been doing it for years, no one's ever challenged me. They just assume that I'm talking about my staff and I, or my family and I. You know what I mean? I speak in that plural, and I try to do that on purpose. Sometimes I write that way, and I've had a few people challenge that, you know. But typically I just explain, hey, I'm trying to acknowledge my trichotomy. A lot more power in that. Stephen Mills, you know Stephen Mills, he has mastered that. I mean, Stephen is aware of his trichotomy practically every moment of his life. And people who meet him know there's something very unusual here, very unusual. Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. It goes on, here's another one. Just be yourself and do what comes naturally. How many times have people heard that? Just be yourself and do what comes naturally. Bad counsel. Why? Well, we live in a socio-economic world which is supranatural. Supra. Not supernal, but supra. We're above nature in that we're cognitive. One illustration. When you're doing what comes naturally, how much trouble can you get into? Well, young woman meets young man meets young woman. There's an attraction, juices flow. They fall in love, have sex, and have a baby. And people go, wow, yeah, that's a miracle. Well, the fact of the matter is that cockroaches do that. I mean, that's called propagation. I mean, that's doing what comes naturally. And how much pain has there been coming out of that kind of thing? See, we're better than that. We're above that if we think our way through. Because see, what's driving that, what's driving those urges is a subconscious mind that's just trying to survive. And one of the ways it has of surviving is propagating. For example, you take a one-celled animal, a paramecium or an amoeba, and you isolate it under a microscope and you prod it, and it's going to react. It's going to try to survive. But if you leave it alone, what will it do? There'll be two. It'll propagate. Notice, in other words, this is as natural as breathing. And so just be yourself, do what comes naturally is not good counsel. In other words, if you're going to do something, like say a young kid is going to give a speech. And if you say, well, just be yourself and do what comes naturally. First of all, he doesn't know who himself is. Now, you won't believe how many people I've said, who are you? I mean, a lot of research here. Who are you? And I always get the same answer. A name, a marital status, and a job, or the kind of business they're in. Because my name is John Thompson, I'm married, and I've got 2 kids, and I work for MCI. And then they say, okay, that's a good start, but who are you? And most people have trouble after that. Haven't thought that through. Really, really fascinating. And so you say to a young person, just be yourself and do what comes naturally. He has no concept of what that's about. Is he going to make a great speech? Probably not. So what should we say? All right? Let's find people who make speeches and then watch them carefully and copy them. That's how you become a great speaker. You watch a speaker and you copy him. Okay, you go outside yourself for the information. Okay, confidence, sure, confidence in things, confidence in the law of gravity, confidence in the law of averages, confidence in the practice process. You need confidence in your imagination and your decision-making abilities. Those are the confidences you develop. They're outside of yourselves. It's a major, major step. Don't copy. Recognize your uniqueness and use it. How many times has that been said? Bad copy. Bad counsel. If you want to do something, find someone who's doing it well and copy them. Why would you try to reinvent the wheel? Now, once you've mastered and you've gotten just as good as they are, then you might try some experimenting and your creativity. Well, let's give an illustration. Say here we are at a golf course today, beautiful setting and what have you, and you've never played golf, okay, and you decide, I want to be a good golfer. Okay, what are you going to do? In all probability, you'll find someone who knows how to play golf, and you'll say, how do you do that? And if you get independent and say, well, that's uncomfortable holding the club that way. And keeping those arms straight on the backswing, that's not even possible. And so you begin to play golf like Adam Sandler did in that movie. You ever see that thing? Where he was playing it like a hockey player? I mean, it's a lot of fun, but it wouldn't work very well. Everyone's trying to do it exactly the same way. Right now, I think everybody's trying to probably do it like Tiger Woods does. He's the very best, so you copy him. No one is redeveloping a new grip or designing a new club just for themselves. They're copying. And so excellence comes out of that. You find excellence, and you watch it, and you copy it until you begin to be as good as it is. Then you might try some creativity. If something is worth doing, it's worth doing well. Did you ever hear that one? Bad counsel. Not good counsel. If something is worth doing, it's worth doing well. What I have seen over the years, masses of people, they get into this kind of business, and they're waiting so they can do it well before they get started. And guess what? They run out of time and money. Yeah, if something is worth doing, it's worth starting badly. Now get going. I mean, there's no question. You gotta get really good at being just fair. Actually, you gotta get good at being poor. Well, you gotta be willing to be poor at something in order to be great at it. In other words, if something is worth doing, it's worth starting badly. Because they say, well, practice makes perfect. That's not true. That's not true. Once again, since we're at a golf course, let's talk about Tiger Woods. I don't think anyone has practiced more diligently and for more years than he has, okay? And there's no question he's extraordinary. But he has some bad days and has some bad strokes, has some bad holes. He's far from perfect, far from perfect. Now, we don't want to deny the word practice. That could be the most important word in our vocabulary. And I wonder, let me ask you this. What were you practicing yesterday? On purpose now. What were you purposely practicing in order to enrich and enhance your life? What were you practicing yesterday? And most people really have trouble thinking of anything. They just kind of been doing, functioning by rote. See, what were you practicing? Why should we put such emphasis on the word practice? You understand that doctors and lawyers don't succeed or fail. This is not part of the vernacular. It just doesn't work that way. You don't talk about doctors succeeding and failing. They what? They practice or they don't practice. You and I have the right to take that same posture. Now, what does practicing mean? And it means it to them, too. That when you're practicing, there's three magical things that occur. Within that concept of practice, you have a permission. And within that process, there's a premise, and there's a promise. These are why you should say, I'm just practicing. I'm practicing today. Okay? Practice. I've got permission, if I'm practicing, to be clumsy, inept, and occasionally inadequate. And maybe, in the conduct of human discourse, I give myself permission to be inappropriate. I can correct it if I make a mistake. See what I'm saying? In other words, you've got to give yourself permission to be clumsy, inept, and inadequate. Otherwise, you may not move forward. May not even move forward. The premise is you got to stretch. You got to go beyond what they typically call a comfort zone. You got to do things you can't do yet. You got to call on people who probably aren't going to buy. You got to go for the shot you probably can't get. Okay? Otherwise, you're not really practicing. But after a while, you fill that gap. You actually fill that gap because the promise is, and the way the brain is structured, the promise is you're going to get better and better and better. Gradually, no question, but you're going to get better. That's pretty exciting when you think about it. See, if you give yourself permission to practice, practice what? Practice being a better spouse. There's some real work to that. Practice being a better parent. You got to practice that. It's not natural. It's natural to nurture, but it's not natural to rear another human being who's going to go out in the world in a supernatural society and excel. That takes some real work. Okay? So you practice being a parent, practice being a spouse, practice being a better citizen, practice being a salesperson. It takes a lot of the onus off of it, doesn't it? You say, hey, I'm just practicing. But when you say that, you're reminded that, hey, I got to stretch, got to study, got to think, got to plan, got to function, but I'm going to get better. That's pretty reassuring. No question about it. We've already talked about the ladder of success. No ladder. Here's another thing that comes up a lot. Time heals. You ever hear that one? It's not true. That is not true. One of the essays that we do is on breaking the bottlenecks of bereavement. And you would not believe how many people we've encountered whose lives are stuck. They cannot function appropriately because of a loss they've experienced. Maybe they lost a baby, or maybe a sweetheart, a spouse too soon. Maybe their dad died too soon, or their mom. For example, just recently I had a Diane Barnes in class. And when I started to talk about this, I could see she had a problem. And the first thing you think about is, oh my gosh, maybe she's lost a child or her husband or something. Turned out it was her brother 19 years prior. 19 years she was in a state of bereavement. Nothing in her life was working. Relationships, her career, she would get stuck. We addressed the issue, gave her some tools to work with. I accompanied her to his graveside, and we did some work there. She walked away after about 2 hours clear. 2 hours. I mean, she just didn't know how to do it. Didn't know how to do it. And there's so much information about that kind of thing. Time does not heal. It allows for other stuff to stack in on top of it. But then all of a sudden, I walked into a funeral home in 1979, and I'd taken a contract to sell pre-arrangement for this funeral home. And I went to visit the funeral home and did the tour, and we finally ended up at the selection room. Had no idea what that was, walked into the room, naive, open. It was a whole room full of caskets and markers and what have you. And I had an episode. I mean, I stood there and all of a sudden a wail came out of me, uncontrollable. I began to sob, my knees buckled, I got real nauseous, I was convulsing. They said, my gosh, they whisked me out of there and said, what's wrong? I said, I don't know, and I didn't. I was really having some difficulty. And it didn't happen to the two guys who were with me, so I knew it was what? It was me. Something was going on. Within a matter of hours, I recalled. It was exactly the same thing that happened to me in 1951 when my father died. I walked into the room with a casket, and I recognized it was him, and I lost it. I was 19 years old. I was in uniform, and you're supposed to be what? Strong, supposed to be there for people. And I wasn't, so I excused myself, went outside, recuperated quickly, and that was the last grieving I did until 1979. How many years is that? 28 years stuck in bereavement. And so I made a study of the phenomena, made a study of it. Figured how many other people are stuck that way. Oh, and by the way, when I developed the tools to get through it, it changed my whole life, changed my whole existence. And I thought, my goodness. So we made a practice out of that. Got a lot of information. And I've got a parade of people who all of a sudden had a whole new life within a matter of hours or a couple of days. Fascinating. People say, well, everyone grieves in a different way at a different time. And I said, I understand that, primarily because they hadn't been taught how to do it. We haven't been taught how to do that properly. So you have no idea the impact of losing a child could have. Can you even imagine that? But it happens every day, and people's whole lives are ruined because of it. So there's a way of doing it. I lost a son. How long ago was it? You were there that day, weren't you? And yeah. Friday night, we found that my son had died. Sunday morning, I came to do a seminar, and Sunday afternoon, I went to take care of the details and to grieve with the family and talk them through it. We didn't have the privilege of seeing his body, because he was too far decomposed when they found him. And so we didn't have that advantage. There's an advantage in viewing and being with the body. And so we had to do the mental work. And boy, I'll tell you, for a couple, 3 days, there was a lot of tears, a lot of shaking, and a lot of laughing. But his mom and his sister and brother, they managed it beautifully. We got on through pretty good shape because we know how to do it. There's a technique that can be employed. And what we're really doing in the technique is honoring the trichotomy. We found a way to honor their trichotomy, to take care of the subconscious mind and let the conscious mind be free. Really kind of fascinating. Time doesn't heal. Proper grieving does. Forgive and forget, another Qwertyiops if I ever heard one. Because there is no forgetting. If you've been hurt, if something occurred, you're probably not going to forget it, because they've proven there's no erasure of synapses in the human mind. I mean, it's there. I've had people say, well, I'll forgive, but I'll never forget. And you can tell by the way they say it that they probably haven't forgiven either, you know. They're just trying to satisfy society, if you would. Forgive and forget. So that's a lie in itself, and yet we continue saying it, hearing it, bantering it about. And someone comes along and says, well, it's not forgive and forget, but I mean, you got to have a life, you got to grow up, so you should just what? You ever hear the next one they say? Let it go. Just let it go. And there's a little piece of the mind that goes, how? How do you let it go? Yeah, I mean, in 79, 1980, I was going through this research, and I was going to seminars and reading books and what have you, and I wasn't coming up with anything. And I went to this one seminar. It was a room about this big. And when I got there, I noticed, whoa, this is going to be good. This is going to be good, because up front, there was this big aviary. Now, if a bird cage is big enough, you can call it an aviary, okay? This is a big bird cage, and it had a whole bunch of doves in it, white doves. Now, they weren't doves, they were pigeons, but, you know, I didn't say anything to anybody. I didn't want to give them away. But I knew what they were going to do, and sure enough, at the end of the seminar, they had us writing down our pain, our hurt, and our griefs and what have you on little pieces of paper, and we'd print real small, and they rolled them up, and they put them into these little plastic vials, and they attached them to the dove's feet, okay, the little legs. And then at the very end of the seminar, it was a beautiful day, much like today, we went outside and everybody kind of assembled around, and they opened the doors and let the doves go. I mean, plop, 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 there they go. And we watched them until they just disappeared. And you're talking about tears and hugs and touchy-feely. It was a great, great moment. Just let them go, they said. Well, I knew myself, certainly, and I knew some of those people. And it was pretty evident within 2 or 3 days, half a dozen days, that those had been homing pigeons. All that stuff came right back. They hadn't gotten rid of it. You can tell by the way they behaved. And so letting it go is not the key. And so forgive and forget, just let it go. There's another dimension. We have another seminar that we do on that one premise, how to recapture authority and esteem, primarily through learning how to forgive effectively. And it's a hidden art, believe me. Most people don't know how to do it. And it's been fascinating. I have seen careers just accelerate once they've cleared up their past. Fun stuff, fun stuff. Let's get into the business world a little bit. I bet you every salesman in the world has heard that, hey, selling is a numbers game. You know, and I jump up and down and I go, no, that's not so. I'm not a number, never met one. Never met a number. No, it's a heart and mind business. There's no question. Don't take no for an answer. It's the silliest thing in the world. Of course you got to take no for an answer if there's one there. You mean to tell me if a salesman comes into my home and I say no, he's not going to accept that? We're going to have a problem. Bad counsel. Bad counsel. Avoid canned pitches or dog and pony shows. There's nothing more powerful than a very carefully prepared presentation. A script, we call it. Nothing more powerful than that. It can't be delivered like you're reading it out of a book. You got to integrate it and use it as your own, but it's an accumulation of the best way of expressing an idea, a fact, or a concept so that people can understand it. That's all a script is, and boy, you better have a bunch of them if you're going to be successful in selling. I've never known a salesman who could just wing it, make it up as he went all the time. It's impossible. You can't do it. There's certain things that need to be said, need to be conveyed to people. Get good at handling and overcoming objections. I say, no, I don't want to be handled and overcome. Don't want to handle and overcome anybody. Now, I don't mind addressing their considerations. See, a person says, I can't afford it. That's not an objection in my mind. That's a consideration. They have a financial situation they're trying to weigh. And if I address that issue and help them think their way through it, oftentimes I'll get the sale. But I don't have to handle and overcome anybody. Got to get used to rejection. And I say, no, 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 no. You got to get used to understanding. They're not rejecting you or your product. They're avoiding. They're avoiding. The onus is not on you. It's on the person who's unprepared to say, what is it you have? To be naive and open and to investigate and ask questions and then make a decision. A lot of people don't know how to do that well. And so it's not a matter of getting used to rejection, but understanding that they are rejecting their life and their perception of the way things are right now. Get in or take control. of your attitude, time, prospect, bad counsel. Everything we do throughout this series is designed to assist people in understanding they're not in control. You better give it up. Control is a whimsy of the mind. There's no such thing. You are, however, in command of the direction your life is taking. In other words, being in command, you have the right to make choices and decisions that would influence the direction your life is taking. But you're never in control. What's the difference? It's semantical. In the fact that a ship's captain is not in control if the ship's engine is broken down and the screw's not spinning, but he's still in command of the vessel. There's that fine line in there. And so as you and I are the captains of our vessels, we can influence a lot of authority over what happens. Maybe we got time for Qwertyiops. What is a Qwertyiops? That's the top row of a typewriter keyboard. Qwertyiops. Qwertyiops. Understand very briefly, the typewriter keyboard that we're using traditionally was designed to slow us down. Because back in the days of the manual typewriter, people were jamming the keys. And so the engineers said, hey, we got to do something, so they redesigned the keyboard to slow the typist down. 78% of the strokes are with the left hand. Most of the vowels are difficult to reach. If you remember, the A is very challenging. You know what I mean? Yeah, it was designed to slow you down, and it worked. With the advent of the Selectric electronic typewriter, it was no longer necessary. I mean, you couldn't jam the keyboard. Okay, so they redesigned the keyboard, calling it a Dvorak. And by practicing the Dvorak for about 20 or 30 days, everyone could literally double their typing speed and be less prone to stresses in their hands. Carpal tunnel syndrome with typewriters and computers has become a major health issue in our society. And that could be eliminated with a Dvorak keyboard. It's on your internet, by the way, and your computer could be reprogrammed. What we're really saying in the long and short of it, that we've been programmed a certain way. There is a solution. Life can get easier, better, and more productive if you stop and think and say, whoops, I'm going to do it this way. The challenge is there's some unlearning to do. So you have to unlearn that stuff. People don't want to unlearn the QWERTY to learn the Dvorak. But the rewards would be incredible. And what we're saying is the same thing here, that if you become conscious of the Qwertyiops, and by the way, this is only a short list. You could go on and on with these things, on and on with them. If you become conscious of what you're saying and the impact that it's having and begin to address those issues and change them gradually, it can make all the difference in the world. We, through this process, have accelerated a lot of careers and relationships. And it's all been done essentially with semantics. It's really, really kind of fascinating. To sum it all up is that we go on from here to all kinds of things. There's no amen to any of the essays because they're all a beginning to something else. But we want the very best for you. I've been called, the coach of the losers. And if that's the way it is, fine. But everything I do is to work with these 80, 90, okay, with the 80, to work with the 80, 90, and the 97 percenters who want to be up here. And I'll tell you what's really fascinating is the 20s and the 10s and the 3s. There's a lot of them who want these people to join them and don't know how. I constantly run into managers and supervisors and what have you. They want to do more. They want to be able to elevate and motivate and inspire and direct, but they don't know what else to do. Okay? And what we've done is accumulate a whole bunch of information that can facilitate that, make it easier. Okay? But anyway, thank you for listening, and I'm assuming that we've used up our full time. It's just not a matter of turning the tape, but going on to the next event. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next DVD or in the next concert. Okay? Thank you.